James thought his wife was hiding a pregnancy when her smart scale reported consistent weight gain to a government department. The armored van outside their home would reveal the shocking truth. Emma had gained 12 pounds in 3 months. She claimed it was stress eating from her job at the medical supply company, but her bathroom scale told a different story. James Morrison checked the biometric home app on his phone for the third time that morning. The data was undeniable. Emma's weight had increased steadily since February. 2 pounds the first month, 4 pounds the second month, 6 pounds this month. The pattern was too consistent to be random stress eating. It looked exactly like early pregnancy weight gain. The SMART scale was mandatory for all households as part of the Population Health Monitoring Initiative. Installed by the Department of Reproductive Health, it tracked weight fluctuations that could indicate unauthorized pregnancies, eating disorders, or other health conditions requiring state intervention. James stared at the graph on his phone. Emma's weight curve matched the textbook progression for a woman in her first trimester. But she hadn't mentioned missing periods, morning sickness, or any of the other symptoms he'd expect. Which meant she was either hiding the pregnancy from him, or she was hiding something else that explained the weight gain. Yesterday morning, Emma had stepped off the scale and immediately checked her phone with an expression of barely concealed panic. When James asked if everything was okay, she'd claimed the scale was acting glitchy and needed recalibration. But the biometric home system was designed to be tamper-proof. Government health monitors didn't develop glitches. They detected patterns and reported them automatically to the appropriate authorities. James closed the app and tried to focus on his work. As a systems analyst for the Department of Economic Stability, he spent his days tracking resource allocation and distribution patterns across the city's various residential zones. The work was routine but important, ensuring that food, medical supplies, and other necessities reached the areas that needed them most. But he couldn't stop thinking about Emma's weight data. If she was pregnant, why wasn't she telling him? They'd been married 4 years and had discussed starting a family, but they'd agreed to wait until their reproductive compatibility assessment was approved by the state. Unauthorized pregnancies carried serious penalties. Couples who conceived without proper genetic screening and resource allocation approval faced forced termination of the pregnancy, sterilization procedures, and relocation to lower-tier residential zones. James pulled up the Reproductive Health Department's reporting portal. Citizens were required to report suspected unauthorized pregnancies within 72 hours of detection. The penalty for failing to report was almost as severe as having an unauthorized pregnancy. His finger hovered over the Submit Report button. Reporting Emma could protect them both if she was pregnant. Early cooperation with authorities often resulted in reduced penalties. But if she wasn't pregnant, if there was another explanation for the weight gain, filing a false report could trigger an investigation that would upend their lives. James's phone buzzed with a call from Emma. "Hey, honey, I'm going to be late again tonight. We're doing inventory at the warehouse, and it's taking longer than expected." "How late?" "Probably around 9. Don't wait up for dinner." But James was already checking Emma's real-time location through the biometric home family tracking feature. Her GPS signal showed her in the industrial district, not at the medical supply warehouse where she worked. "Emma, are you sure you're at the warehouse? Your location shows—" "Oh, that thing's been acting up all week. We're definitely at the main facility. Look, I have to go. Supervisor's calling a meeting. Love you." She hung up before he could respond. James stared at his phone, watching Emma's location dot move through an area of the city that had been under quarantine for 6 months due to a contamination event that had never been clearly explained to the public. Civilians weren't allowed in the quarantine zones without special permits. The areas were supposed to be uninhabitable due to chemical spills or biological hazards. So what was Emma doing there? By 8 p.m., Emma was back at the warehouse, her location data showing her at her legitimate workplace. When she came home at 9:30, she looked exhausted and claimed the inventory had been more physically demanding than expected. "I think I need to start working out more," she said, heading straight for the shower. "All this lifting and carrying is wearing me out." James noticed she'd changed her clothes completely before coming home, even her underwear. Her work bag contained items that seemed odd for inventory management: energy bars, bottled water, and what looked like basic medical supplies. "Emma, can I ask you something?" She paused at the bathroom door. "Of course." "Have you been feeling okay lately? Any unusual symptoms? Changes in your body? Anything I should know about?" Emma's expression became guarded. "Why would you ask that?" "Your weight has been increasing pretty consistently. I was wondering if you might be pregnant." Emma went very still. "You've been monitoring my weight data." "The biometric home app sends alerts about significant health changes. I wasn't spying. I was concerned." "How much data have you seen?" "3 months of readings." "Emma, if you're pregnant, we need to contact the reproductive health department immediately. The longer we wait—" "I'm not pregnant." Her voice was sharp, tense in ways he'd never heard before. "James, have you shared this information with anyone?" "Not yet, but the system automatically flags patterns that suggest—" "You haven't filed a report?" "I wanted to talk to you first." Emma's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank God. James, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you won't report the weight gain." "If you're not pregnant, what's causing it?" Emma looked at him for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to tell him. "There are things happening in this city that you don't know about. Things that would upset you if you knew the details." "What kind of things?" "Promise me you won't ask questions I can't answer safely." The word "safely" sent a chill through James. "Emma, what are you involved in?" "I'm helping people. That's all I can tell you." "Helping them? How?" Emma disappeared into the bathroom without answering. James heard the shower running and tried to process what she'd told him. If Emma wasn't pregnant, but was helping people in ways that required secrecy and caused weight gain, what did that mean? James spent the evening researching the quarantine zones where Emma's GPS had shown her earlier. Official reports described them as contaminated industrial areas where chemical spills had made the environment temporarily unsafe for human habitation. But when James cross-referenced the areas with his work databases, he found something disturbing. The quarantine zones corresponded exactly to low-income residential districts that had been scheduled for urban renewal projects. Thousands of families had been evacuated from their homes with promises of temporary housing and eventual relocation to improved facilities. But according to James's resource allocation data, no food or medical supplies had been delivered to those areas in over 2 months. If the zones were uninhabitable due to contamination, that made sense. But if people were still living there— James pulled up population data for the quarantine zones. Officially, they were listed as zero occupancy. But utility usage records showed continued water and electricity consumption, suggesting that residents were still present but had been cut off from official supply chains. The weight gain pattern suddenly made sense. If Emma was smuggling food to families trapped in quarantine zones, the extra weight could be from supplies she was carrying. But smuggling resources to unauthorized areas was a serious crime. The Resource Allocation Act made it illegal to provide food, medical care, or other necessities to people outside the official distribution system. The penalty was imprisonment and relocation to labor rehabilitation facilities. James's phone buzzed with an automated alert from the biometric home system. Household member Emma Morrison displaying continued weight increase pattern. Reproductive Health Department notification scheduled for automatic transmission in 24 hours unless manual override submitted. The system was about to file the report for him. In 24 hours, unless he actively intervened, Emma would be flagged for investigation of unauthorized pregnancy. The next morning, James watched Emma prepare for work with new awareness of her behavior. She packed her bag with items that now made sense: energy bars that could be distributed to hungry families, bottled water for areas where utilities had been cut off, basic medical supplies for people who couldn't access healthcare. Emma, the biometric home system is going to automatically report your weight gain to reproductive health tomorrow. Emma dropped her coffee mug. What? I can override it, but I need to submit a manual report explaining the weight increase. If you're not pregnant, I need to know what to tell them. Emma sat down heavily at their kitchen table. If I tell you the truth, you'll be an accessory to everything I'm doing. And if I don't report anything, we'll both be investigated when the automatic alert goes out. Emma was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with an impossible decision. Finally, she spoke. The quarantine zones aren't uninhabitable, James. There was no contamination event. The government sealed off those areas to force residents to relocate to labor camps disguised as temporary housing facilities. James felt the world shifting around him. Labor camps? Families who couldn't afford rent increases or meet new housing standards were classified as economically non-viable and removed from their homes. The quarantine story was cover for clearing the areas for redevelopment. But the chemical spill reports? Fabricated. Those families are trapped in their homes with no access to food, medical care, or supplies. The government expects them to either die or surrender and accept placement in work facilities where they'll never see their families again. Emma pulled out her phone and showed James photos that made his stomach turn. Families with young children living in apartments with no heat or running water. Elderly residents who looked dangerously malnourished. People who had been abandoned by their government and left to starve. I've been smuggling food and medical supplies to 12 families over the past 3 months. The weight gain is from supply packs I carry in bodysuits under my clothes. James stared at the photos. How many people are we talking about? In the quarantine zones? Approximately 3,000 residents who refused to abandon their homes when the evacuation orders came. Most are elderly, disabled, or have children too young to survive the conditions in the labor facilities. And they're all just trapped there. The areas are surrounded by checkpoints. Anyone trying to leave is arrested for quarantine violation and sent directly to the labor camps. Anyone trying to enter is charged with contamination protocol violation. James thought about his work managing resource allocation databases. He'd noticed the dramatic decrease in supply requests from those districts, but had assumed it was due to successful relocations. Now he understood that the lack of supply requests meant people were dying. Emma, what you're doing is incredibly dangerous. If they catch you, they'll classify me as R-source terrorist and sentence me to permanent labor detention. I know the risks. Then why are you doing it? Emma showed him another photo. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, smiling while holding a piece of bread. Because someone has to. The official channels abandoned these people. If we don't help them, they'll die. James's phone buzzed with another biometric home alert. Reproductive Health Department automatic notifications scheduled for transmission in 18 hours. I have to override the report. What should I tell them? The truth, I guess, that I'm not pregnant, and the weight gain is from increased caloric intake due to work stress. Will they believe that? Probably not. They'll likely require a pregnancy test and medical examination. James thought about the photos Emma had shown him, about families starving while he managed databases that could have prevented their suffering if he'd understood what the data really meant. There's another option. What? I could report that the weight gain is from legitimate medical treatment for a diagnosed condition. I have access to medical databases. I could create documentation that would satisfy their investigation. Emma stared at him. James, that would make you an accomplice. If they discover the falsified records, then I'll face the same consequences you're already risking. Why would you do that? James looked at the photos again, at the faces of people his own government had decided were disposable. Because now I know what's really happening, and I can't pretend I don't. That evening, James used his database access to create medical records indicating that Emma was receiving treatment for a hormonal condition that caused weight fluctuations. The documentation would satisfy a routine investigation, but wouldn't hold up under detailed scrutiny. This buys us time, he told Emma, but we need a long-term solution. The long-term solution is getting those families out of the quarantine zones before winter. Without heat or adequate food, most won't survive until spring. How many people would that take? More than we have. Our network is 12 volunteers helping 3,000 people. We're overwhelmed. James thought about his position in the resource allocation system, about his access to supply databases and transportation schedules. What if we had someone on the inside? Someone who could redirect official supply shipments to the quarantine zones? That would require massive database manipulation, the kind of thing that would be noticed immediately. Not if it was done gradually, through legitimate channels. Emergency medical supplies for contamination assessment teams, food and water for environmental cleanup crews. I could create work orders that would justify regular deliveries. Emma was quiet for a long moment. James, what you're describing would be a conspiracy involving dozens of fake work orders and thousands of dollars in redirected resources. If we're caught, we're already caught. The automated monitoring systems are getting more sophisticated every month. How long before they detect your movement patterns, your supply purchases, your association with other volunteers? Emma's phone buzzed with a message from someone identified only as M. Emergency meeting tonight. 3 families in Zone 7 haven't responded to communications for 48 hours. I have to go, Emma said, grabbing her supply bag. People might be dying. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You're not trained for this, and I'm already involved, Emma. And you need someone with access to official systems if you're going to save those families. 2 hours later, James found himself following Emma through a maintenance tunnel that led to the edge of Quarantine Zone 7. He wore a bodysuit packed with medical supplies and enough food to feed a family for a week. The extra weight made him understand why Emma had been showing consistent weight gain. Carrying these supplies was exhausting. Stay close and don't make noise, Emma whispered as they emerged into the abandoned residential area. The quarantine zone looked like a war zone. Broken streetlights, boarded windows, garbage piling up in areas where collection services had stopped. But lights in apartment windows showed that people were still living there, trapped in deteriorating conditions while the outside world forgot they existed. They climbed to the 3rd floor of a brick apartment building where Emma knocked softly on a door, marked with a small chalk symbol. An elderly woman answered, her face lighting up when she saw Emma. "Thank God. We thought something had happened to you." "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is my husband James. He's going to help us get you and your family to a safer place." Inside the apartment, James met 3 generations of a family who had lived in the building for 20 years. The government had declared their home uninhabitable due to contamination, but they had nowhere else to go and no resources to relocate. "They told us the temporary housing was only for 30 days, Mrs. Rodriguez's son explained. "But people who went there never came back. We heard they were being sent to work facilities in other states." James spent an hour documenting the family's situation, taking photos and gathering information that could be used to create legitimate relocation requests through official channels. By the time they left, he had a plan. Over the next 3 weeks, James used his database access to create a complex web of work orders, supply requests, and contractor authorizations that redirected resources to the quarantine zones. Environmental assessment teams that existed only on paper, cleanup crews that were actually Emma's volunteer network, medical supplies for contamination testing that were actually food and medicine for trapped families. The operation grew rapidly. What had started as Emma carrying supplies in bodysuits evolved into a sophisticated logistics network that helped evacuate families to legitimate housing before they could be forced into labor camps. But the success attracted attention. James was at work when the call came from someone identifying himself as Agent Harrison with the Resource Management Investigation Division. "Mr. Morrison, we've detected some irregularities in resource allocation requests originating from your access credentials. We'd like to discuss this matter with you in person." "What kind of irregularities?" "Supply authorizations for projects that don't appear in our master database. Work orders for contractors who don't exist. We think someone may be using your access codes to commit resource fraud." James felt his blood turn cold. "When would you like to meet?" "We're in your building's lobby now." Through his office window, James could see black vehicles surrounding the building. Not just investigators, tactical teams with the equipment for arrests and seizures. James quickly sent a coded message to Emma. "System compromised. Execute emergency protocols." Then he deleted every file, database entry, and communication record he could access before agents reached his floor. Agent Harrison was a man in his 50s, with the cold efficiency of someone who investigated resource crimes professionally. "Mr. Morrison, our audit shows that over the past month, approximately $400,000 in supplies have been redirected through work orders created with your access credentials. I create hundreds of work orders every month. If there are irregularities..." The irregularities all involve supplies being sent to areas that are supposed to be uninhabited, areas under quarantine protocols. James tried to maintain his composure. Maybe the orders were for contamination assessment or cleanup operations? "There are no contamination assessment operations scheduled for those areas, Mr. Morrison, because there was no contamination. The quarantine zones were created to facilitate urban redevelopment by forcing residents to relocate." The agent had just confirmed everything Emma had told him. The quarantine story was a lie designed to clear poor families from areas targeted for gentrification. "Sir, I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm implying that you've been systematically stealing government resources to aid people who are interfering with lawful relocation programs." Agent Harrison placed a tablet on James's desk, showing surveillance photos. Emma entering quarantine zones. James himself carrying supply bags. Families they'd helped evacuate to legitimate housing. Your wife has been identified as a leader in a network that has prevented the lawful relocation of over 200 families. Families who were supposed to be processed through labor rehabilitation programs. Labor rehabilitation programs? Employment and housing facilities, where non-productive citizens learn to contribute positively to society instead of consuming resources they haven't earned. The casual way Agent Harrison described forced labor camps made James feel sick. These weren't rehabilitation programs. They were facilities designed to exploit people whose only crime was being poor. Agent Harrison, what happens to my wife now? Mrs. Morrison is currently being detained for resource terrorism, conspiracy to obstruct government operations, and leading a criminal organization. She faces permanent detention. And what happens to the families she helped? They'll be relocated to appropriate facilities where they can receive the support and guidance they need to become productive citizens. James understood that Emma's rescue operation was being systematically reversed. The families they'd saved were being rounded up and sent to the labor camps they'd worked so hard to escape. Mr. Morrison, your cooperation in this investigation could result in reduced penalties. We need information about other network members, supply sources, and families who received unauthorized assistance. James thought about Mrs. Rodriguez and her family, about the little girl who had smiled while holding a piece of bread, about the 3,000 people still trapped in quarantine zones waiting for help that might never come. Agent Harrison, I want to speak with a lawyer. Legal representation will be provided after your debriefing is complete, and we've addressed any ongoing security concerns. As James was escorted from his office building, he saw the armored van that had been parked outside his home that morning. Emma would already be in custody, probably undergoing interrogation about the network she'd built to save families from government abandonment. The biometric home system had detected Emma's weight gain and automatically flagged it for investigation. James's attempt to protect her had only delayed the inevitable discovery of an operation that had interfered with the systematic elimination of economically non-viable citizens. But as James was loaded into the back of the van, he realized something important. Emma's weight gain hadn't been detected by accident. The government's monitoring systems were designed to identify any deviation from normal patterns, not for health reasons, but to detect resistance activities. The bathroom scale, the fitness trackers, the biometric monitoring, it was all part of a surveillance network designed to identify people who were helping others survive when the state wanted them dead. And now James understood that his own resistance was just beginning.
The story ends, but the system continues. This channel survives because of you. Like, subscribe, and share. The next transmission awaits on screen.